You missed the original use of the personal computer.
Yeah, the personal computer, and then before that, all the other computers that came before that. So the computer revolution kind of happened over the 50 years, right before I showed up.
What was the first personal computer?
The first personal computer. The first true personal computer, they were like kits in the early 70s that you could build. The first interactive computer that you could use the way you use a PC was all the way back in the 50s. It was a system called Plato at the University of Illinois, where I went. And there's a great book called it's like the Bright Orange Glow, and it was a black screen with only orange graphics.
Wow.
And they built it by hand at the time, and they had the whole thing working. And so they like these ideas are all old ideas. They had email, like they had all these ideas kind of way back when.
They had email?
Yeah, they had email and messaging and multiplayer video games and all that stuff back in the 50s.
Really?
Yeah. It just was only in a couple places. It was really hard to get it working. It was expensive.
When you say multiplayer video games, it wasn't like a graphic video game.
They had like very simple graphics, had very simple like space war games or whatever. I mean, really, if you remember like Asteroids.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that quality of stuff, or even simpler than that.
So what year was Asteroids?
Asteroids would have been in the late 70s, 77, 78, 79, somewhere in there. Pong was 74, I think, which was the first arcade video game was Pong.
Yeah, we had one somewhere around that time, and I remember thinking it was the most crazy thing I've ever seen in my life, that you could play a thing that's taking place on your television, you could move the dial and the thing on the television would move. I mean, it was magic.
Yeah.
It's so crude and dumb for kids today. They would never believe the impact that it had on people back then.
So before the one you had on your TV set, that was later on, before they had the arcade game, the console and the arcade. And the story there is crazy. Is this guy, Nolan Bushnell, who's the founder of this company, Atari, that basically created the video game industry. And he developed this game, Pong. So he literally built one. Like they had no idea if anybody wanted to play a video game at that point. So they built one. They built this console. They put it in a bar in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. The guy, the owner of the bar, called up 3 days later, and he's like, your thing is broke. Like, come get it. Nolan's like all depressed, and he goes in and he realizes the thing, it's so jammed with quarters. It was so popular, right, that people just like kept jamming quarters in it, right? And it literally, like, it couldn't take any more quarters. And literally he was like, aha, proof people actually want to play video games. Like that's how, like, even that was not obvious at the time.
Yeah, I remember the first video game arcades.
Yeah.
And like a complex game was that there was like a Dungeons and Dragons game. What was it called? Dragon Quest or something like that?
There was the first Laserdisc game, which had like video clips.
Yes.
It's probably the one you're thinking about.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
what was it called?
Something like that, yeah.
Do you remember that game, Jamie? Do you know what I'm talking about?
He's way too young.
And there was like a move that you had to do really quick, and if you did the move correctly, you would go on to the next level. If you didn't, like a video graphic would play where you got killed.
Well, it was a big. I think if it's the same one, it's a big deal because it was the first game that had video clips.
Yes,
and that was a really hard thing to do. And it had like a giant, platter, Laserdisc platter.
Yeah,
inside playing these clips. And again, it was like it existed. It was just really hard to make it work.
Did you find it? That I think.
That's probably it.
Let me see what it looks like. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Right. Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair.
So if you did it correctly, you would get this video where you went through all the right moves and you got to the place, but you would have moments where you had to make a quick decision, and if you made the correct decision, like here, like jumping to the flaming ropes, if you made the correct decision, you would get across. Right. But if you screwed up, they would play a video of you dying.
Right, exactly.
And that was super sophisticated back then.
Oh, yeah. This was a marvel at the time.
And I remember the early days of the arcade, where video arcades were around.
Yeah. So look, all this stuff is super obvious in retrospect. Like it's obvious in retrospect. Everybody wants to play games. They want them at home, all this stuff. Like at the time, it was not obvious. And that's kind of how all this new technology goes. It's how the internet was. In the very beginning, it's like, well, I don't think anybody's going to want to do this, was the overwhelming view. And then, and by the way, not all new technologies work, but the ones that do, people look back and they're like, well, that one must have been obvious. And it's like, no.
Was it the people at IBM? Who was it that mocked the idea of a personal home computer?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Well, there was a famous statement of the founder of IBM, this guy, Thomas Watson Sr., and he did this. He famously said one of these things, maybe he said it, maybe he didn't, but he said there's no need for more than 5 computers in the world. And right. And the theory was basically the government needs 2, right? They need like one for defense and one's for like civilian use. And then there's like 3 big insurance companies companies, and that's like the total market, right? And that's all anything needs. And then there's a famous letter in the HP archives where some engineer told basically the founders of HP they should go in the computer business. There's an answer back from the CEO at the time saying, nobody's going to want these things. So like, yeah, it's tenuous. I mean, the famous New York Times wrote a review of the first laptop computer that came out in like 1982, 1983. And the review is, you read it, say it's just scathing. It's just like, this is so stupid. I can't believe these nerds are up to this nonsense again. This is ridiculous. And then you realize like what the laptop computer was in 1982, it was 40 pounds. It was like a suitcase, right? And you open it up and the screen's like 4 inches big, right? And so like the whole thing's slow and it doesn't do much. And so if you just like take a snapshot at that moment in time, you're like, okay, this is stupid. But then, you project forward. And by the way, the people who bought that laptop got a lot of use out of it because it was the first computer you could carry. Like that turned out to be a big deal.
Well, it's probably very valuable now, right? Yeah. Just as a novelty piece.
Yeah. But like this idea that we got from like that's just absurd to literally everybody carrying a supercomputer in their pocket in the form of a phone in 30 years.